All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Filipino-American Woman Project. I am your co-host, Jen Amos. And as always, she will join us visually via video in a second here. But as always, I have my co-host with me, Nani Dominguez. Nani, welcome back.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the show.
Yes. And as we wait on Nani, but not really wait on her because she says it's okay, we can move forward. I just want to remind you all that if you really enjoy our conversation today, remember you can shoot us a text or a voice message at 415-484-8329. Again, that's 415-484-8329. We actually had someone recently send us a voice message, Nani, and it was more so about like them interested in learning how to podcast. And so that's a conversation we'll bring up next week or in another conversation or another episode, because we have been wonderfully getting a lot of traction and feedback on, people just wanting to get advice from us on how to podcast. So it's been really cool to see again, like where the direction of this community is going and what people want from us. I don't know, Nani, if you had any initial thoughts about that.
I think that's what we've tried to be pushing for a really long time. And I know that a few of the past guests that have been on our show have started their own projects or branched off and started their own podcasts, even teamed up with each other to start podcasts. So we are, again, all for more Pinay in podcasting, and however we can help. We definitely want to make sure that you all know we're here as a resource for you if that's something that you think you're interested in doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And we will be providing more information on that in the upcoming episodes. Also, as a reminder, if you love our show and you want to financially support our show and really continue to support, media platforms led by women of color or Filipino-American women in this case, check us out on biasboba.com. That is where we have people just supporting us financially and also getting some exclusive stuff like our private podcast show, Chismis with Jen and Nani. Nani, our listeners are in for a treat because I actually have some legitimate chismis to share in upcoming episodes.
Yes, you do.
Exclusively on Chismis with Jen and Nani. So if you all want to be a part of that, if you want to hear Nani and I get down and dirty on certain topics, especially in my own personal life that's been going on lately, really check us out at biasboba.com. And yeah, just stay tuned for more of those updates. But without further ado, really, really, really excited for our conversation today. We have actually been talking to this individual via email for some time now. And so I am just ecstatic to bring on Catherine Febria, who is a freshwater ecologist, boundary spanner, and Filipinx settler currently at Turtle Island. So without further ado, Kat, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you.
Yeah, we're really
happy
excited
to be here.
Yes, definitely. It's great. As we were saying offline, you're saying like, oh, it's nice to finally put a face to the voice because you've been listening to our show. And I want to let our listeners know, if you want to look up Kat, check her out on Instagram or Facebook. Her username is Healthy Head Water Slab. So once again, that's Healthy Head Water Slab. And also check out her website, healthyheadwaterslab.ca. So look her up as you're listening to this conversation. And if you love her and you like her and you want to reach out, that's her contact information. So Kat, I'm just excited to chat with you because we've been talking via email, back and forth for a while now. So let's just start with you sharing, how did you hear about the show and what compelled you to join us?
Yeah, thank you. Again, it's just great to be here because I feel like you were some of the positive, bright voices of the pandemic for me. I run a lot, and when we went into lockdown, I just was obviously isolated from like family and friends. I had just moved back to Canada. So I'm, where I am today is in a town called LaSalle, which is close to the city of Windsor, and it sits across the river from the city of Detroit. And so it's right in the basin of the Great Lakes. And I had relocated back to Canada. I grew up here, but I was born in the Philippines, but I had spent the last better part of the decade in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and also in Maryland, USA. So, coming back to Canada was really about reconnecting with people for a number of reasons and to do the work that I do, but also because all of my family are here. And then, within the year, the pandemic and lockdown happened, and it was a really isolating time. And even despite all of our Zoom calls and the ways of connecting, when I run, I try and find something, like I listen to different things, and I was like, oh, I wonder if there's a podcast with like, voices that sound like me, or like it's like hanging out with my sisters and my cousins. I just sort of went through that journey of like trying to find, I just like listening to the different stories and narratives of people who are kind of living and have lived experiences that are similar to mine and that relate to mine. Because I spend a lot of time in other spaces as the other person in, in predominantly white spaces or predominantly, Filipino or Filipino-Canadian spaces. And so it's just a really nice voice and stories. And there's so much joy. And yeah, so that's what kind of connected me to you. And there was definitely, especially in this past year, several calls, like you did some lovely call-ins to want to diversify voices and perspectives. And this is definitely after a year of the listening to others and, in isolation and reflecting, like my year to respond. And so with the invitation to add other voices, I reached out and just said, hey, like I'm a node in your network. And and in that spirit of gratitude, really just reached out to just thank you and let you know that, the Filipino-American community is very much, a Canadian community as well. And, we all call this place home. And if there was a voice there, if there's someone out there like me who's listening and finding community, then, maybe there are other people that I could connect with through you.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Kat, so much for sharing all of that and for just your kind words, that we were sort of the positive, bright voices during the pandemic. We had received feedback before where I forgot exactly. I know someone mentioned this, but they sort of thanked us for just having the show during the pandemic. I remember one of our listeners said, like, thanks for showing up. Like, thanks for showing up the way that you do, because it's been hard. It's been hard for us too. Like, it's not like Nani and I live in this bubble and, we're just doing the show without any relation to the outside world. Like, we very much ourselves have been struggling as well. And if anyone listens, kind of pieces together my story throughout the episodes, like I've been struggling too. I've been struggling with finding a sense of community, especially locally, and then also dealing with my own depression and all these things. And so, I think that to be able to come together and to
intentionally,
to come together intentionally. Thank you, Kat. But yeah, to come together intentionally and to, share our vulnerabilities and share what we're going through. I think it helps us in this really weird time right now to not feel alone, even if it's just a voice such as our podcast to acknowledge even what we're going on in our own lives. So you'd be like, okay, I'm not the only one. Like you mentioned, even though you have family in Canada, it still has very much felt very isolating for you. And so it's great to have a medium such as our podcast to, keep us all connected and also hear similar voices to know that, you're not alone in that.
And it makes a difference too. Like I had realized like in my podcasting, a lot of the voices are predominantly white, whether it be news and that kind of thing. And I just remember being like, hold up, there's definitely, I just made it intentional. Yeah. Just like, I want to hear other voices. Like, I know we talk about representation and diversity, saying we want to see other colors or we want diversity and inclusion, all these things. And I'm like, yeah, in my ears as well. Like, I definitely want to hear voices and perspectives that I can relate to. It does matter.
Yeah, definitely. And, in regards to, our Canadian counterparts, it's like we are in this big Filipino diaspora, right? Like we have families scattered all over, as I was mentioning offline. My mom told me like 2 years ago, like, oh yeah, we have family in Canada. Like I remember she was going to come visit from California. She's like, oh, while I'm here, why don't we visit our relatives in Canada? I was like, wait, what? I was like, we have family in Canada? And then she booked a whole trip to spend time with me. And then she's like, by the way, I booked a trip for a week to spend time with you. Like totally tells me this last minute.
Yeah, of course.
Yes, mom. Yes, mom. I don't have a life. I was like, I don't have a life. Like, yeah, I'm going to move everything aside for you. But it's my mom. She gave birth to me. So yes, she's right. I will do that for her. And yeah, and just being able to, go from Virginia and just road trip up to Canada and meet family there and then go to New York to see my sister. We all are connected. And just to let our listeners know, we are not just exclusive to Filipino-American women. It just started there because that's who I am, and that was my starting point for me. And we've really expanded and invited other narratives and perspectives on our show. And we continue to do so, especially the plans that we have for Chismis with Jen and Nani on our private podcast. But thank you, Kat, just for your engagement with us and even just you wanting to give back and contribute and share your story. And if you are all watching via video, Nani is with us now. So
Hey,
Nani,
y'all.
I want to turn it over to you and see if you had any thoughts on our conversation so far.
Yeah. Well, thank you for saying that, first of all. The feedback really means a lot to us. And I know we've been in communication with you via email for some time now. So yeah, it's just nice to, again, we get a lot of email feedback or Instagram DMs or responses to our newsletters from people letting us know how the show is impacting them, which is, all that we need to really validate what we're doing. But it's different to then take that relationship and actually bring you on the show. And especially in regards to expanding the narrative, I love that we're having our first like Pinay-Canadian on the show, because that's something that I've been.
Am I really the first?
Yeah, you are. And so I've been increasingly interested in kind of the differences that people experience as a Filipino American versus a Filipino Canadian, because I hear that the Filipino culture in the diaspora there is very different than, what we have talked about.
It's different and the same. It's different and the same. Yeah. Like my whole journey with what Filipino Canadian identity was like really wove in kind of settling, thinking about and having so much American family and spending summers. I spent summers in Ohio and understanding through that lens, the Filipino American experience was very much, it felt like the Filipino Canadian experience at the start. We were doing the same things. We're family, and then also because like North America is literally like, is the settled island into an imaginary line that says this is America and this is Canada. We speak English. Like there's so many things that are so much that are so similar in our culture, like, North American culture. So much of American culture is in Canadian culture, and just, it's like little things like how we spell words or the temperature, just those remind you that we're different. But, everything about, especially when I was getting like into high school and going into university, it was really transformative for me, because I would go, my cousin in Ohio, who was in university at the time, and my other cousins who were in university in Canada, like I would tag along with them, like anything we could do, we would do as cousins. And it didn't matter that, it was like, we'd all go to spend Christmas in Ohio, or they'd all come, and we were this like, family unit. And when I was like old enough, my parents were like, oh, you're going to go with them. And I like literally went to like a Filipino American youth conference, like Find in like the 90s with my cousins who were in college, and they were just like, yeah, just come. And I was like, yes, I can do a road trip. Like I can't go sleep over at my friend's house down the street, but I can go across the border and go like hang out with my Filipino cousins. And that's okay, that's fine. And like, but it was through that lens, I would just like go to these conferences with them and observe them. And they were amazing big authors for me. And then we would, I would realize there's this whole diaspora. We're part of this bigger community. And then for me, I'm the nerd in the family. Like I was like the person that would stay at home and do my homework, and then would have to pick up like cousins and stuff later. They're like, our car got towed. Can you pick us up? Like I was like that. And they're like, who's going to be up at 2:00 studying? And they're like, we'll call Kat. And I would be that person. And so I think, but it was through, so much of our growing up and so much our way of knowing how to be Filipino in North America was through the American lens. And, understanding, I knew more about like, the Filipino community in California. We have family there too. Mm-hmm. And, just seeing how, this wave of people and my wave of immigration came along, during the Marcos dictatorship, as did many of us, right? Yeah. So, nurses and military and everything coming into North America at a time when there was so much political unrest in the 70s. So, so much of that felt tied. So it didn't, I didn't really separate the Filipino American experience from the Filipino Canadian experience. I think just in general, all of that came because I go into another space and someone would be like, oh, but you're Canadian, not American. It's just like when you go into other places, I feel like a lot of my identity is through relationships. And it's only by going into other spaces and then seeing somebody make some sort of assumption about me, do I realize like, oh, there is a line. And I think that's sort of why we talk about this boundary spanning thing. Like, I feel like I spent a lot of my life in the middle, like in between places or in between spaces of things, and figuring out how do they all connect. And the more and more that I've done my work as a scientist and in predominantly institutional or white spaces, I realized like, oh, my gift here is that I can build a bridge. I can figure out something about the system and either translate it in English to my dad or, to my or whatever, or I can like take this science and actually make it impactful or useful. So I feel like as I've spent a lot more time between different places, I try and figure out like, how do they connect to me? And then I realize there's a lot of people that are trying to figure out a way to connect. And so, on the surface, there's a lot of words about me that don't make sense. Like, oh, like, Pinay, like Canadian scientist, like whatever, like how does that, and then talking about, being in this space, in this podcast, like for me, it completely all makes sense because it weaves into my identity and my purpose. So yes, like American culture was very much ours. And then likewise, the more and more I did that, I realized actually what is the Canadian experience like? And that kind of set me on a path.
Yeah.
And when so then you realize like, so what is the story of the Canadian immigration story in Canada? And Again, I was just so lucky, especially during university, to connect with the different student groups. But then also I did my master's in Vancouver and I spent time volunteering with the Philippine Women's Center. Again, I think I've just always been part of a family and part of a way of being that was always thinking about not only what was I doing, I've been in school for a very long time and I work at the university. I'm still in school. Like I feel like every September, my husband's like, okay, it's time for you to go to school. I know you're excited. But, I always have thought about the purpose. Like, yes, I'm here learning for me, but then how am I like contributing to my community in that way? So part of that was when I was doing my master's in Vancouver, I spent a lot of time at the Philippine Women's Center, connecting and being in community and relationship with a lot of women who are my age. But there's a whole history in Canada of live-in caregivers or nannies that live in Canada. And that's so much of our story. A lot of women come into Canada by themselves, leaving their family behind and working through an immigration process that requires them to live in the homes of families and taking care of their children and cleaning their houses at the expense of leaving their families and their houses in the Philippines behind, waiting and, working through a process that will hopefully and eventually reunite them. And so, and then doing the community work to try and give a voice to these marginalized people in our community. So nannies who didn't, they don't have health insurance, they could be underpaid and overworked and know who would speak for them. And then also just thinking about the broader ripple effects that happens. So when you finally do get reunited with your family, that child that might have been 9 could be an adult, or, that might have been a baby, doesn't, it knows their grandparents better than their own mother. And so you can see how that breaks families. And so a lot of the work, even though I was doing, science in the Arctic, I would, when I'd be in Vancouver, I spent a lot of time just trying to understand my own sense of self and purpose. And, I didn't know it then, but like begin this process of learning and decolonization and just like this thing of like, okay, who am I? How do I relate to these people? How do I relate to this big, broader picture? There's a huge component of the Filipino-Canadian narrative that is through the living caregivers just as much. And it continues to be an issue now. So this whole idea, and women would be my age, they would be the same age as me. And I would realize like, how lucky am I that I get to do university, not just once, but this is grad school now. So I'm like, I'm doing it again. I'm living on my own. I'm like traveling out, like using it to travel. It was my, education was my ticket to explore. And how lucky am I? And I can't just be in this space for my own benefit. How can I relate? And so I spent as much time there. And that's kind of really stayed with me for a long time, as well as because I knew that in my bones, I wasn't just a Canadian. I wasn't just, I was an immigrant. And so there's just like lots of things that immigrants and the Filipino community in other places experienced. And I realized that there was something good that could come from that as well. And I spent a lot of time up until that point, going with my parents to grocery shopping or like, reading different things. We went to school in French, like just like spending a lot of time in lots of different worlds and trying to like translate it or build a bridge and figure out what your role is in all of that. And for me, it was science and it was water and it was, connectedness. And now I see that it's actually part of all of the things that make me me.
Wow. I have so many thoughts, but I thought I'd go with Nani first if you wanted to speak first.
Yeah, no, I just love your passion for really tying your sense of purpose to your community. Even it sounds like from a young age, like as you're exploring what means what to you and what you want to do, it sounds like you've always had that tie back to your community, whether it be through your family or these other spaces that you have found yourself in. And so I appreciate that you kind of, it sounds like, have used that as like your North Star on your journey. And I think that is, what we were talking about in the beginning of the interview, what the pandemic has really made difficult for a lot of us. And we take that kind of nature of Filipino culture of just like having family around all the time or being able to, up and call someone at 2 a.m. to come pick you up. We take that for granted because now we can't really do that. And so, yeah, again, it's nice that you listen to this show and find that sense of community here with us.
Yeah,
and we
sound like my cousins, like when I'm running, I'm like, and I talk to them all the time. We have like our wine and unwind wine nights kind of thing. And I was just I feel like I'm just like running with, and they're probably tired of my voice. So it's just like, just sharing that space with you. It's like, but yeah, I agree. Like it is about a community and realizing that community is like, it's a ripple. It's you and like all of these other things. And, there's these imaginary boundaries, but we are still all connected. And everywhere I've traveled, I've met Filipinos everywhere. and, like literally everywhere. And we find each other. Like I'll be,
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Right. You look at each other and you're like, oh yeah.
You're like, I am gravitating toward you right now.
Yeah, like there's something, and that itself is a gift, and it's really helped me feel like I belong in the world as well. Like I remember when I was like 19, I went to the Arctic for the first time by myself, and my parents trusted me. But a lot of my grandma, my aunts and uncles were like, "Why are you letting her go by herself?" And they're like, "Well, she can do it." And I remember like it was for like a placement, and I was like the one kid that was just like, I want to do that one. I want to like whichever one, like it's in the Northwest Territories, I'll go there. And it's in Yellowknife, I'll go there. And, I realized, I'd go shop, grocery shopping or whatever. And I would hear women in Tagalog speaking in Tagalog. And I'd be like, oh, kumusta? And they're like, hey, oh, just like, oh, kumusta? And then we realized they were nurses. And, I currently have a cousin working in Yellowknife as a nurse. And then, I'd go to other places, like a woman walking to church, she like saw me and she's like, oh, are you Filipino? And I'm like, yes. She was like, oh, you should come. And then I'll introduce you to my son. But like, it doesn't matter where you are. Like, I remember my father-in-law saying, oh, you're in Italy. And like, the person, we just started talking in Tagalog, like, you just go to all of these places. And because we, like whatever, we're all the face of a colonized people. We like have so many, we can mix and blend in so many different things. Filipinos are English speaking. So you could, we work in lots of different places, literally having family working on every continent. We are everywhere. And so I think that's kind of how I've come back to myself, is realizing like the Filipino diaspora is global. And what do you do with that? Like this seems like you could say that we're like spread everywhere. And what is our identity? And I think maybe, just really embracing that, especially now that I see the next generation blending even more and spreading and growing even more. And so that's another, I think, intention with engaging with you, is just sort of marking, this is where we are today. Who knows what's going to come of this? If I never record my voice again because I hate it and it's very awkward, my daughters and my nieces and nephews might one day kind of come back and be like, okay, this was like here's a post back to my ancestors, and I might be generations away from it. Yeah. And so much of that I think is meaningful.
Yeah. And, when it comes to the initial hump, a lot of people have to get over when it comes to being on something like a podcast is hearing their voices. And the reality is, like, our voice is going to sound like our voice. It's always sounded that way. It just so happens that we're hearing it for the first time.
Yeah.
And so in knowing that, it's like, even if you're hearing it for the first time, your friends and family are like, that's how you always sound, Kat.
I know, right? Well, I did a couple of radio shows when I was living and working in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And I was like, oh my God, I sound like my sister, Tessa. This is, I was just like, I sound like, and then I was like, wait a minute, we're related. This all makes sense. But like, but as soon as it was like a shock to me, it called me to attention. But I've embraced it now because I think the work is too important, and the intention of connecting and my gratitude is that overwhelming that I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. That reminds me of when my sister came on the show in December, and I remember, she's my sister. So I was like, I'm used to her. But like, when I hear her voice, I was like, we kind of sound the same, like the way we talk, like we kind of, for me, I realized that I don't know how to explain it, but like, I try to have a low voice as much as possible. I don't know, as if I'm like, and this is actually part of like, now that I'm realizing, and I'm realizing this is probably an insecurity of mine, is like, I talk really loud. Like I talk like my mom. Like when she's on the phone, she's not talking. She's like yelling. And, and joke, like literally, like I think like 2 weeks ago, I was meeting up with a new friend and we were hanging out at this Panera shop, Panera Bread. And we kept our mask on because we were like meeting each other for the first time. And I didn't realize how loud I was talking, because the ladies next to us, as they were walking away, they like passive aggressively like yelled at us. They're like, so loud, no respect for other people. And I remember looking and I'm like, I literally didn't realize how loud I was, because I thought I wasn't loud enough, because I had.
Well, it's also the masks. Like people can't hear you underneath the mask, so you kind of have to yell.
I definitely overproject, thinking like the mask. I know.
So like that,
we're all awkward now,
Oh, exactly.
Nobody knows how to be in spaces together anymore.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So that like recently happened to me, and I didn't really think too much. I was like, it was more like feedback, like, oh, okay, I was loud, And so I kind of find that I talk lower on purpose. I think for that reason, like knowing how vocal I could really get. And then when I heard my sister talk, I was like, oh, she kind of talks the same way that, I mean, we're sisters, like you said, Kat. It's like, we're duh, like,
why are we surprised?
Yeah. It's like, why am I surprised? I shouldn't be surprised. But anyway, Kat, in listening to your conversation, there's two things that you mentioned that really stood out to me. And the first thing is how much you recognize that a lot of your identity comes through your relationships. I think very often we try to identify with, let's say, our ethnic background, our heritage, but it could be so conflicting because, let's say for me, to my knowledge, 90% of my family is still in the Philippines. But, I was born American, I was a military child. I moved around a lot. I was exposed to a lot of American culture, and I even have a white husband. So just very American culture. And so for me, I always feel like I'm trying to straddle that gap between, or trying to find that balance between being American and being Filipino and all that stuff. And so it almost feels like we have to like choose sides sometimes, And so I like how you mentioned like how your identity comes through your relationships, because if we look at it that way, it goes beyond identifying with a certain heritage, but it's more about like who you interact with,
And I think it's more forgiving. It definitely is more kind, and it reflects like a process. Like our identity is constantly evolving, and so much of I definitely feel like who I am today still is inherently me. Like I still am that same person, but I definitely feel like as you travel through or have a conversation with someone and they're like, "Oh, you're Filipino," and then they'll like, they might say something. It says a lot more about the other person, about their impression of you. If you change their mind, like, "Oh, well, you sound very educated," whatever. Or then you go in a predominantly Filipino space and they're like, "Why do you talk in this way?" Or how, I've just definitely navigated through all of these different sorts of situations where I'm like, okay, that says more about you than it says about me. So
it's a projection.
Right. Right. Like, just all of the different things, like, where are you from, but where are you from? And because I've been in different, like literally when we live in New Zealand, people would automatically assume we were Maori. And then they'd hear us talk and they'd be like, "Oh, you're Hawaiian." Like they just assumed you were indigenous. Or like when I was when I go and work in the community, and when I was like in Arctic, they would assume I was Dene or like, from an indigenous tribe. And I'd be like, "No, I'm Filipino." And so it just says a lot about other people's perceptions. And so I said, well, for me to be able, what armor do I need to travel in these spaces and still be inherently me? Well, these are things that I know that are true. And so I think over time, it's really just trying to find and consciously and intentionally seek out people who have words, and I've been able to find a lot of words through your podcast about like, yes, try that on, think about that. Is that me too? And that sort of thing. And I always land in like, actually, I'm somebody's daughter. I'm someone's grandmother. I'm connected to the land. I'm connected to the water. I'm someone's sister. These are all relationships. It actually isn't about just being Filipino or being in Canada and even seeing Canada from away, like in America. Like I only kind of knew what what things about being Canada meant and what that was when I started to live across the city and across the country. I grew up in Toronto and then I lived in Vancouver and I did work in the Arctic. And so like only by positionality, everything is about a relationship. And I do want to credit like ancestors, like my grandmother and like our elders who always just tell us stories and knowing that it's important, but even at a young age, not knowing what to do with that. And then also hearing it echoed by working and walking alongside indigenous cultures and realizing relationship is everything. So that's the bit I think for me right now at this point in my like years of being on this planet, it is about relationships. And this is who I am. And being a Filipino Canadian, a settler, an immigrant, like all of those things here on this, on this land, it's all of those things. And I think I just got tired of trying to be in one box or the other. And I'm being like, it's all of it. And I think that's a lot of my research and a lot of the way I live and do is like, we embrace the diversity and that is who we are. And that happens in all of this, even in my own household, we're all Filipino ancestry, but literally my two kids and my husband and I, we were all born in a different country. So it's like, it's not even about what passport you carry because we call Canada home right now. But one was born in New Zealand, one was born in America, I was born in the Philippines. But we can all say that we're Canadian. We can all say we're Filipino Canadian, and and that identity can change over time. So I think it is that's why I've landed on it's the relationship. It is about spanning a boundary, multiple, and it is about connection.
Yeah. And then the last thing I want to add, and I want to definitely get Nani's thoughts on this, is another thing you mentioned is the gift sort of having all these different layers to you and different experiences is being able to build a bridge, you know, within your relationships or with whoever you talk to, wherever you go, is having that kind of communication skills to create that space for people to connect. And part of what has been extremely important for me, especially as this show evolves and even in my professional career, is having communication skills because otherwise it is easy to assume, right? Like just like how these people that you've encountered in different places try to put you in a box or try to label you, which I think the reason why people do that, and I think about like why I would naturally do that in my head, is because we're trying to feel safe. You know, we're trying to identify with something that reminds us of something so we feel safe. You know, so I get that. However, I do think it's important to have the verbiage, the language to, even though you're thinking that, you know, to have the language to not other the other person, right? And it's really about, and I like how you mentioned, like kind of just picking up even the words throughout our show, because that's what Nani and I have been navigating is like how to, like, clearly we all have the same issue of like trying to not feel othered, but like, how do we have that language to build that bridge so that we could be proactive to not feel othered all the time. I'm not saying that even if we're proactive, it's not going to happen. It's still going to happen, but still having the language, having the verbiage, having, you know, the awareness to use the right words to build that bridge. And so again, I'm just processing everything you're saying and wanted to just mirror that back to you and express my appreciation, you know, for you to mention all these things and realizing that it is about relationships at the end of the day. Because one thing I have found, and even in our own community, is just because you're Filipino doesn't mean we're going to get along, you know, like it does not absolutely mean that. And I have different stories to share, you know, and I know many of us do many stories where it's like, wait, I thought you're Filipino. I thought you would be on my side, you know, but even then, you know, because in some people it's debatable. Some people don't identify as Filipino. They identify more with their indigenous roots, you know, they don't want to identify with King Philip, you know, who like named the Philippines, like they don't. And so again, I think communication is so key, and like why we love, at least why I love what we do here at the TFAW Project, is having that new language in a sense to build those bridges. Like that's the gift we have, like being in the diaspora.
That's right. And especially when you like are in, I mean, Toronto is awesome. It's in an immigrant, like it's a city of immigrants. It's the world. Like it was wonderful. But, you know, we would very quickly be like sorted, right? Like, you know, and there's different communities. It's a city of communities, which is beautiful. Like I realized that itself was a gift because I could navigate. I would know about like the Jewish holidays, and I would also know where to get the best jerk chicken and like know about all of the different intertribal Filipino differences. Being in Canada, like, you know, you just get all of that. And then you travel to other places and be like, oh, that's not normal. And so it's just kind of like resetting every time. But I think, you know, I guess, you know, it's just that spirit kind of, this experience is here to tell you something about yourself. And just also realizing that, like, you know, immigrant communities have really had to struggle. The struggle I remember in the 80s and 90s was very different for an immigrant community in the 80s that what they're experiencing now. And I would sort of see that play out going through the school system, right? Like, you know, we were in French school and somebody else wasn't. We lived in one part of the city and somebody else didn't. And like that would just all play out and you wouldn't realize, you know, what that all meant. And I just, I think at a very early age, I've always just been very curious about not only what you're doing, but why. So I think my parents probably just like, I don't know, I probably overwhelmed them. And I used to be very thinking like, oh, well, you know, you keep forgetting about me. Like I'm the typical middle child, right? And that's middle child. Like, oh, you forgot.
Oh my God,
me.
You're cool. I'm a middle child too.
Right. And I still, you know, you throw me in a group with my sister, I still will revert back to that person. And I'd be like, well, you know, they spent so much time, like, but so that's why I've been in school this whole time, or this is why I would travel for years or whatever, because like, people would forget about me, and like shame on me, because I also had a gift of like inheriting all of my family's photo albums. When I moved back to Canada, my parents downsized and moved out of our home that we've had, the only home they've owned since they immigrated. Wow. And then I've been like taking photos and sending it to my cousins and all of the elders and things like that. And I'm like, shame on me. There are so many photos of me. Like my parents did love, you know, just like, I would like complain. I'm like, oh, that narrative.
Hey, I totally get that middle child syndrome. Trust me. I hear you.
Right? I'd be like, you forgot about me. But like, you know, bless their heart, like my parents, like they were amazing. They, you know, when I went to the Arctic, my mom, who hates the cold, like came up in the middle of winter. You know, I found a parka for her, and there are pictures of her like standing by her side of like a stuffed polar bear and like, you know, doing all of these things. my sister my younger sister moved to Nicaragua and worked for a bit. Like all of it, we did a family trip to Costa Rica, met her there. And like, I was just like, here they are, like holding space and like letting us do what we do. And again, so yeah, it just comes back like, that's what family can do. That was their version of trying to support us and make sense of all of those experiences. And yeah, I'm just super grateful for that. And yeah. Anyway, so I definitely sent a lot of apologies. Like, I'm sorry if I ever said that you didn't take pictures of my childhood. I have found 7.
I found the pictures.
They're like, oh, I was loved. Yeah, I definitely.
But as I was going through it, so I think it's like that grace. The relationship thing changes. You grow over time and you learn more and you realize just how important those things are. Yeah.
You're like, thanks for putting up with me throughout those years where I felt like I wasn't enough or I wasn't noticed or I wasn't important. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, yeah. And I kind of forgive myself for that. And that's why I like to remind people, like, everything's a journey. Like, we talk about kindness as a verb, not only here in our home, but in my lab and with my team, and that it's a choice and it's a muscle. Like, you practice it. Like, it's not just, I was, really lucky to be part of this like movement of kindness in science. How do we dismantle the systems that create oppression and that have really been a place of, marginalizing and separating science from, society? And what are we doing if we're not actually having a positive impact? And how can we change the structures that create these educational systems or research systems that are really, dishonoring our responsibilities to things like indigenous communities that are systematically set up for people who are, disadvantaged to not rise, like give opportunities and really just, again, find that language to do that. And in that process, I was just like, one of my daughters is like, oh, so we're kind. And I was like, yes, but not that mommy was kind from the beginning. Like, this has been a work, like, just like, it's taken a while. I wasn't born like this way. Like, we grow and we learn, but, so all of those times, when I think of like other people in my life, some people come out and they're just like rainbows and kindness and empathy. And for me, it's just been a work in progress to like continually find that language, learn how to do it, go through experiences, try and learn from them, be grateful for everything, even if it is hard, because you really learn something about like yourself. But yes, and I always come back to being that hyphen, like both Filipino and Canadian or North American. And like that still stays with me.
Yeah, for sure.
No, I love what you said about so much of our identity being really about our relationships. And I think that, so far, I'm sure we'll get into more, but I think that is like a great title for this episode. So much of being Filipino is based on our relationships and beyond identity. I like that you also said we're kind of, this conversation or this podcast is kind of like marking a post as to where we're at today or what we're going through today for our kids or our grandkids or, 10 generations later to listen back on and be like, oh, this is what they were going through.
And that's the scientist in me too, right? Because it's like, we want to understand if something changed. Well, we need to like have data and, even just trying to change that narrative, right? Like, it's not like an experiment that you sign, like everything about the science we do is like in the real world. And I'm trying to remind people who are all about like trying to have a number about it and generating a statistic to say like stories are data, the stories we tell is knowledge. Like we need to be really open and conscious of the fact that if we want to change for the better, or if we are doing something because we want to make it a positive change, then like take note, like just like see where you're standing right now and see how far you go and understand if things change. And so I would just, so me being here again is just being to be part of that positive change, because I know that we're all going to come out of this time questioning who we are now and who were we before.
And if we want to change,
where do we want to go?
Yeah, if we want to change those stereotypes of what a Filipino looks like or what a Pinay looks like, then, we have to tell those stories about I'm Filipino and, whether that be whatever culture you're a part of, wherever you live, whatever you do, however you identify, we have to show people the diversity in, just the spectrum of who we are. And so I love how you kind of brought that up in your work. And I'm curious about that when you talk about dismantling like systemic oppression and stuff in the workplace. That's obviously a really big conversation that's going on right now in America. So I'm curious how that differs in Canada, like what the climate is right now in Canada in terms of like social justice and identity politics and all that kind of stuff. And then furthermore, in your industry as a freshwater ecologist, like that's just such a unique field to be in. And I'm just curious how, in your experience, those systems have kind of affected either you or people that you know that come from indigenous cultures, and what the differences that you see in the opportunities that they either had or did not have.
Yeah, well, thank you for those questions. So the systemic part, so I guess that's the one point of difference between Canada and the US, is that Canada is a Commonwealth country of, the British Commonwealth. And Canada also has a history of relationships with Indigenous nations across the country. And that is still a very tense time for the country, because they're trying to negotiate a better future that is reflecting on a really ugly past where, Indigenous communities were pulled apart through residential school systems and that sort of thing. So it's still very much a living, there are nations that are still living and breathing through that trauma, and continue to get, re-traumatized because of like these words over years, and government saying, we're going to do better and we want to apologize, we want to do these things. But, for Canada, which I think, so it's very aspirational, but it still has yet to really deliver on the promise of reconciliation with the people who were here first. And it's, it's a long history. It's like 500 years of like colonization that's taken lots of different shapes and forms. And America took a very different approach with, the Indigenous communities. And there are some that are, in some places where a lot of that history is removed, but it's still there. So it just looks different because of the way that US is built on different states and that kind of thing. And Canada is different as well. So that's one thing that I definitely see is different. Like it's a common topic of discussion if you choose to hear it and choose to see it. Like these are conversations. And same thing with like any marginalized community. Like I think that's what, with everything happening with Black Lives Matter and everything, and it has its own manifestation here in Canada, but we were certainly here and thinking about it and talking about it. I have colleagues in Detroit. And so my lab is like 2 years old. It's a research lab in the Faculty of Science at the University of Windsor. It's only a few years old, and I relocated from New Zealand, and I specifically decided that this research lab was going to be, I knew it would sit in a system like an institution. It's a university system. I knew that well. I've been in school my whole life. And I just decided that it was going to have values, and it was going to do work that really engaged the system. Like, I have to write grants and I need to do science. I want to train students and I do teaching, but I wanted to do it in a way that was authentic to my values, that didn't separate me as a Filipino-Canadian person, immigrant person, traveling through the world, like with all of these experiences. And that had its place because the majority of the, science has been predominantly pale, male, and stale, was what I call it. So it's like a lot of old
Love
dudes,
that.
a lot of
I could say the same about, I'm in finance. I could say the same.
It's pale, male, and stale. And, thankfully, it was by, and it, like, I think it's hilarious. Like once you see it and you have words, it's so much easier to like be in those spaces, because I'm like, okay, you're that, I recognize this, and it's going to play out in this very predictable way. It means that, I have to secure, like I have research grants. So I'm an assistant professor, and I also hold this thing called the Canada Research Chair, which means that I get additional research funding and like a category of people that they think are going to be leaders in these specific disciplines. And so in my discipline of like freshwater ecology, like I spend a lot of time doing restoration. So how do we heal waters that are unwell? How do we heal the rivers and the streams that nourish us? And because of that, you can't do that without recognizing that it's in a watershed, it's on a land, it's on someone's land, and who does that belong to? And it might be a farmer, it might be a city, but actually it was somebody else's land. It was a nation's land before that. And it doesn't matter. And I think in my field, it doesn't matter how much science we have, we really can't unlock the problem and solve the problem without working with people and without understanding our relationship to this place. And that, again, is because it didn't matter how many scientific papers you would read. They're like, okay, that only ever was done in a test tube or like in a thing. Like if we actually are trying to solve the planet and heal the planet or this river, it is connected to something bigger, and it's not just science that we can use to understand that. And so that's sort of that's kind of the offering. That's the thing that I offered when I was kind of recruited back, was saying like, yeah, I do things differently. Like I'm going to do the science, but I'm going to engage the dimensions within which our water, is framed, how we value it, what we do with it. Are we fishing it? Are we eating it? Like, are we, is it because of the fish? Is it the water we drink? And so much of that knowledge is not science. It's like in our community. It's in generations of people that have stewarded this land. It's talking to farmers. And so we are this like motley crew of people, of scientists that are indigenous, are water protectors. It's a very female-led role, like to heal water. It's working with farmers that don't look like me, but they are very much see themselves responsible for future generations. And so the tagline of our group is using science to connect land, water, and people for the benefit of future generations. So it's this recognition that so much about the institutional and historical approach to science has been to like promote me and cite me and to like give me the money. And for our team and for our, again, we just talked about my personal journey. The work is also linked to that, is like thinking about what can we do to make it better for future generations. Well, we can figure out who we are and where we want to go. We can think about what is the role of science. It's not going to solve everything. And so there's a lot of, you can put the ego in the closet for that thing. If we're really serious about doing better and being better, then there's a role for science, but there's also a more important role for the relationships that we have in this place with each other, and to get this, like to do this job, which is, do the work of, in my case, healing water and the people that depend on it.
Yeah. I love that. Thank you for making that connection. I think that I've been in a lot of spaces around here where, that's incorporated into our check-ins, land acknowledgements, and people are like, I don't get it. Why do I need to know what land I'm on? And it's like, it's actually highly important to know what land you are, especially, in a field like yours where you're actually working hand in hand with nature. And I love the connection that you made about just science in general. Like, it's not just what we're able to like do in a lab, but actually what's happening out in the world, and how did those circumstances of these habitats come to be, and
because
what
was us, right?
Yeah, exactly, because of us. And so who are the people that had those effects, or what were they doing before to sustain this place before we came and ruined it? There's a really great thing I'm starting to read, like Pollution's Colonization, like when you start to actually think about like, how did we become so disconnected from like who we are and where we're at, like, is that in itself is a form of colonization. So I do try to take time to like unpack that and do my own decolonization work and my own reflection to be better in the workspace as well. So if we are doing research, and I do feel responsible for people who have chosen to work with me, right? Like, your family you're born into and the friendships you make, and then you start to recruit and become a mentor to other people who have different lived experiences and different abilities and different gifts. How do you harness that? And so I do take that responsibility. I just take that with such gratitude, I guess, and want to be better myself so that we can all do more. And so it's great because I'm so inspired. We have like a storyteller. So we're like one of the only labs that have like a lab storyteller. Right? So her role is to like talk about our science and create, blog posts about it, and like have a strategy around it, that it's not just like promoting ourselves, which if you go to science Twitter, I don't like it because people are mostly promoting themselves. So what is our intention with these forums? It's to engage people. So, we have intentional conversations about, what does water mean to you? Like, how does you collecting rubbish have anything to do with water? Because it's like this, what is this watershed that you live in? Where are you drinking your water? And, where's that food that you're eating coming from? It's all in this dependency of water, and it's such a precious resource. And so I think, before I would try to be like, oh, just focus on the science narrative, because that's what the science mentors at the time, as I've been going through the academic system, I'd be like, no, science is here, social is there, and like whatever. And I think I just realized, I think some point, maybe a decade ago, maybe when I became a mother, I was just like, forget it. Like, I'm just going to be me. I'm like, I see this all makes sense to me when I can relate them, when I can do interdisciplinary stuff. There's no, and looking out in the world, I'd be like, is there another Filipino ecologist? Am I an ecologist? Are you an ecologist? And I found a few. There are a few of us, and we continue to remain connected. I continue to remain connected with other academics in the Filipino-American space. One of like the profs that when I did my PhD at Toronto, his name was, he's at Wayne State, and Roland Sintos Coloma, he is now like an associate dean at Wayne. And when I landed back, like one of the first trips to Wayne State, he's like, I just need to talk to you. But he was one of those faculty members, that were trying to herd other Filipino students to like connect and give us, we connected with each other in this like colectivo. And that was wonderful. In every kind of academic space, you kind of try and find each other. And so I met one of the Freshwater Ecologists, and she's up and coming, and we were both like, hey, are you? And, that kind of thing. And we're
Love
like,
it.
We gotta know. And likewise, I met a couple engineers when I was in the US. So like, we're trying to find each other. And then I think I just like to again, like challenge the stereotype around like being the professor or being the scientist or being the engineer can also be someone who's very deeply connected to their community and a purpose that's not about like, this colonial defined success. It is maybe something more, and just, letting other people know that if there are people out there that are doing the work, then like I'm out here too.
Yeah. So to our listeners, if you are doing the work like what Kat's doing and you are a freshwater ecologist, reach out to Kat like right now. Her Instagram is healthyheadwaterslab or Facebook as well. And you can also check out her website, healthyheadwaterslab.ca. Connect with her. Again, that's what this is about. It's about our relationships as we're talking about. And, even, part of what Nani and I are starting to do, even in the podcasting space, is to try to connect with other Pinay podcasters and encourage others because, even in radio and broadcasting traditionally, you think about like the white man, right? And so to be in this space and to not see a lot of our faces in the space, it's like, let's normalize this. Let's help each other. Let's support each other. And I like that you're doing the same as well. And the other thing I want to add, just, listening to you is appreciate you describing all of this and, being storytellers of the land, because, for me, my own ignorance, like, I don't think about my connection to the land. I just think, it's land, but I love how you've humanized it. You're like, well, who uses this water? Who has used this land? Like there's a story on this land. And I remember, Nani, in the early interviews that we had with JL Umipig, when she introduced herself and where she came from, she would always honor, the indigenous people who were on the land that she was on before she mentioned the current name of it, the current name, let's say being New York or being California, like she really honored the land. And, at that time, I didn't understand that. I was like, oh, that's very interesting. Like, I'm in Virginia Beach. I don't know the name of the indigenous land beforehand. And to my own ignorance and naivety, like I didn't even care. I was like, well, what does it matter? Like we were here where we are now. And so for you to share all this and really talk about like the history and tell the story, it's very enlightening for me. And it gets
thank you.
Yeah, it gets me to appreciate, like now I want to, study like more of Virginia Beach and Virginia overall. And I mean, of course, like Virginia is very heavy when it comes to American history, but, especially before we, the Pilgrims came here, right?
Yeah, I was just going to say that I'm pretty sure the story of Pocahontas is based in Virginia.
Yeah. There's a thing about it that there's a lot that I'm still learning, right?
We're all a work in progress. I mean, we're all learning. I wasn't like, but when I left Canada a decade ago, I just knew that I wanted to do science that meant something, like all I had ahead of me. And these are these gifts. Like I, lived, in Maryland, University of Maryland College Park, like Obama's time, like, just thinking. And so again, like I learned more about myself by being in somewhere out, like moving. And I think understanding relationship to place especially once you start moving and traveling and, the reality is my children are not going to grow up in the same way that I grew up, in the same place, in the same house. Like they've already moved and float like so many times. Like, so and I think maybe that's why I was just like, so then what is their identity going to be based on? It's going to be based on their relationship and where they are now. And, what is home, and we're just about to move again. So again, it's just like thinking about like, thankfully it's only 10 minutes away and not like to the other side of the planet, but it's just like, so then I don't want their sense of self and purpose to be, the house that they lived in and that kind of thing, but maybe something deeper and something that, goes deeper than that. And so I'm glad that was helpful. And I just also I love the fact that you're holding space. And I look, you're very much a mentor to me too. And the fact that it led me to knowing that there were, once I knew that you existed, like what other Filipino Pinay podcasters are out there. And I think this is the other thing that I wanted to try and emphasize, like we need to know each other and hold each other up, because it's not like the decolonial approach of that is that we can all coexist. Like there can't just be one, but we can all coexist and we can all do really well and we can all lift each other up. And to do anything other than like, if we aren't supporting each other, then that's just the system. That's just the pale male system acting up again, and I just want to move away from that. I want to champion other voices because we're all better. And so I do really just love that you're opening the door for me and for a lot of other people to reconnect and find ways to make meaning.
Yeah. And I really appreciate you saying that, Kat, because I think it does take a lot of heart and faith to do something like this, because I know we all have our stories of feeling othered, even in our own community. but the work has to be done, right? Because it's like, as much as I can, distance myself from, my family or try to distance myself in general, like that desire for me for community is never going to go away. The moment I know there's another Filipino in the room and I want to gravitate toward them, it's never going to go away. And so, I've been thinking a lot about this lately, about how it's very common in our community to sweep things under the rug. If there's a problem, you sweep it under the rug and then you act like it didn't happen and you just continue to show up for the survival of the community, to be a part of the community, because to stand up for yourself is almost like ostracizing yourself from the community. But just learning, but being able to, part of what I feel like I've been leaning more into is not sweeping things under the rug, but actually addressing them. And that's a radical act in itself, because that does cause friction in a community, in a group. Yeah. And so as hard as it is, though, it's like, I will continue to fight for that because I believe in us. I believe in our community. I believe that we can come together and coexist and help one another. Yeah. And we're not going to be perfect at it. Like, we are going to make mistakes. We are going to,
we're not going to be one thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We're not going to be one monolith kind of.
Exactly. Yeah. And we're not, but like, I'm still going to keep trying anyway, because it's just a part of me inherently. And I think for a lot of us to want to, be a part of the collective, be able to coexist. And because, and I say this, I've been saying this a lot, like, we are better together, whether we like it or not, and so just learning to find that language and the verbiage and I think the maturity to talk and build those bridges, right? Like, that's really, I think, going back to even the beginning of our conversation, like, that's the gift we have, that's what our ancestors gave us, in a sense, is the gift to build these bridges, however that looks like in your professional life and even your personal life. So it's just amazing. I'm taking it all in.
Yeah, you guys are queens. I really appreciate you. And that's the thing. We got to be better at it, all of this. This has just been such a weird time. But I think that's the thing. Like, when we talked about just like the science bit and, running a lab, like, I can't change the system, but I can choose to gather myself around people who are like-minded in values and purpose. Yeah. And so, and all of those decisions. And so I'm just trying to consciously, connect and that sort of thing. And so it's just been really nice to find other people and hear from other lives around there that oh, I'm Filipino, I hug people. I'm like, yeah, I do too. Not in the science world, but is that me being Filipino? Or there's just so much, there are echoes of ourselves in so many other people's lived experiences. And if we can just add more voices to just keep demonstrating, I think your body of work will be significant because it demonstrates just how rich our narrative is and how impactful it is in small and big ways. And just you've had a rich diversity of perspectives, and that's the work, right? I just always look forward to seeing what other lived experiences you shine a light on, and just hoping that other people realize that they aren't alone. Their experiences are meaningful. And the sooner I think we forgive ourselves of not being enough, then I think for me, again, I'm the family's Lorax. I'm I speak for the trees, just we need to save the world, something the more, if we can let go of the traumas or whatever we're holding ourselves accountable for too. If we can just be our best selves, then I think we'll get on with the real work, which, to be honest, I think is really saving the water that we're drinking and for the benefit of our future generations. There's a time limit to how much we can keep using and abusing each other in this planet. Yeah. And so, again, this is why I come back to relationships. If people can feel secure in who they are and know that wherever they stand, they are still rooted to their history and they have so much purpose, then we could do that together. And so that is kind of my minor minor act of rebellion and hustle here. I'm just everybody be their best. Because when you're best, then we can be our best. And then we can do the thing, which is whatever it is you're wanting, because we need all of the things to be better. All of the systems that we're in are broke, and all of the systems that we're in could be better. And I think as soon as we can do the work on ourselves and feel confident in what we have to offer and know that it's defined by us, and, we know what we're good at, I just kind of see the best has come from those people who have done the work and feel confident or feel supported. And you just have to look at the students that I'm working with, the things that they're doing, the way they bring art and science together in incredible ways, indigenous and non-indigenous all working together, us kind of coming together and being really it's just a really inspiring place. It's got me through this pandemic. It's and I'm so excited to see what they're going to do. Yeah. And and I'm so excited to see where you bring this as well.
You make me feel so pumped right now. I want to check in with Nani.
I agree with you. It's so amazing to see what people can do or what people can come up with when that, desire for inspiration is really fostered. And that's what we've been starved of for so long. And a lot of this project and what you're doing, like you mentioned before, is just trying to find the language to articulate that. And really, that's so important. And we do that through these, building of relationships and really honoring our individuality, and also how the differences in our individuality connect us, just like you said, like, I'm in the lab, I'm in a science lab, but I'm Filipino, so I want to hug you. Like, can can those two marry each other?
Can they exist? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Can they coexist?
And when I hear like my kids, like, bless their heart, when they're like, we want to be a scientist like mama. And I'm like, I guess I should be really happy, but I'm like, no, you just need to be you. Like, whatever that is. Like, I want
good
you to
answer.
That's not the goal, right? Like, I don't, and while that, part of me is like, I think that's the thing. I was just like, should I be happy about that? Because I'm like a work in progress. Like, I don't know that they want to be me. They should be you. And so I think that always ends up being the advice, is just like, don't. And even when I see to other people, like, oh, I would really like to find other mentors, and like, what does that mean? What does that mentor mean? Because that mentor might let you down or whatever, like, just sort of take what. And so I've had really amazing mentors that have like, take the bits that work and leave behind. Because, I'm really just being honest, just being real. And
well, and the way that I hear, what I hear, Kat, is I think when your kids are saying, I want to be like you, I think a good response is like, be like me, in a sense of be the best version of yourself. Right.
That's right.
It just so happens that I'm a scientist, but you don't have to be a scientist. Right. It's like, yes, be like me, in a sense that I found myself, or I continue to find myself and refine myself and get better. Like, that's what you should take from me. I mean, if you want to be a scientist, I'm not going to stop you.
That's great.
But yeah.
That's great.
Right.
And even this idea of like notions of work, it's like, I don't want you to imagine work as being this thing that takes me away from you. It's me doing something that I love and something that gives me purpose. It's something that we all benefit from. And so again, it's just like taking I question everything. It's just like, what does work mean? And what does labor mean? Like, does it mean that I'm bringing home a paycheck when really women have been doing the work for all mankind? And so it's this like, what does that really mean? And so it's just trying to, again, help the next generation be better, because they'll have the language, and like realize that, we talk about personal best, like, you have to be your best and not my best, but like, be your best. And that will make me the happiest. And so, That's just like on it.
I feel like I mentioned this in a previous episode, but I remember as my husband is trying to take care of his health again, his initial purpose was like, oh, I want to do it for you. I want to get better for you, And I was like, don't do that. I was like, do it for you. Like, do it because you want to take care of yourself. Because here's the thing. Like, if it benefits you, it benefits me anyway. Like, I am the beneficiary of that. So like, don't do it for like we both win when you do it for yourself. Right. And I think that's really the message you're trying to share, is like do it for you, because it actually benefits your loved ones. We all win. Well. Yeah, we all benefit from that. Nani, any thoughts?
Beautifully said. And again, I think it will help not only us, but our listeners as well, just develop language and maybe foster some ideas of how they can use it, outside of just listening to this podcast, whether you respond to us and let us know, how this episode is impacting you or how you're digesting it, or you go and, talk to your best friend or your mom or your dad or whoever. Take the language that you're learning here and use it, I guess is what I'm saying. And lastly, I just want to say I really appreciate your curiosity for the world, and to just find out about people and really get to know people and build relationships. I think that especially now in the pandemic, like you said in the beginning, we're having to learn new ways to connect with people. And fortunately, we're kind of forced to dig deeper since everything is via Zoom, or, we're choosing to be in this space. We're not just here because we happen to be in this space at this time. We get to choose where we want to be now. And so I think that your attitude of intentionality about everything that you step into is just really, really inspiring. And I hope that everyone takes something from that today.
Yeah, I think this is just me, but I feel like it's a very middle child thing to have that general curiosity about life and people. I'm just saying, because we're trying to like figure out where we fit in. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah. So I got you, Kat. I got you. I just want to make sure I've covered all my bases. I know, Kat, you have a life lesson. I know that we've pretty much like covered a lot already at this point, but I know one of the life lessons you want to share, and I think this is really just a good reminder for everyone, is to find your purpose, people, and passion, and to honor your story, history, and purpose. Would you like to elaborate more on that?
Yeah, I think all of the things we've talked about kind of lay out why. I think we have to, if we can find our community, and there could be multiple communities, then we can get on with the work and the things that fuel us. There's so many amazing things that we need to do all together. Yeah, I think I just am really hopeful for the next generation. I hope, maybe my daughters or nieces or nephews, or I don't know, grandkids, who knows what the future, this is going to be on in the future. But I hope we can like look back and realize that there was a meaning to all this, and that we were, we did something to really try and make it better for the future generation. I'm hoping that, they don't have to worry about droughts and floods and, food. And, I'm hoping that these invisible boundaries of nationhood and people belonging and things are discussions we no longer need to have, that we are like part of a richer family because of it. And just letting people know that they're not alone. And if they don't know what that space is, to just work towards creating it, because that's sort of what's worked for me. And then also I'd love to connect with other people that are also in that journey. There are labs out there. There are places in science that can be really fruitful. And there are in the Filipino-Canadian family is very much part of the Filipino-American family. And so, so I think that's it. I think the last story that really inspires me, as I was telling my eldest daughter a couple of years ago, and I never want to forget it, is that I would sort of say, she's like, but why are we here? I was like, oh, well, because she's like, why are we in Canada? And I said, well, your grandparents wanted to give us a better life. And she's like, well, why? And then she just kind of, and I said, well, our ancestors wanted to give better opportunity to the next generation. And, and one of the reasons why they did that was they thought that we could have a better life here in Canada.
Yeah.
And then she was like, all of my ancestors. And I was like, yeah. And, in some cultures, like where we've lived, like, in the stars, all of our ancestors are in the stars. And we were outside at the time, and she just started crying. She's like, I can't believe so many people loved me and they didn't know me. And I was like, and that broke me. And I was like, I have a responsibility. Like, I have a responsibility to them. I have a responsibility to this world. And I just want to do what I can for them.
Oh my gosh.
That gives me goosebumps. It's so sweet.
Yeah. Yes. I was like, I need a minute.
What a sweet moment. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
How profound. And I never want to forget that, because I think, at the end of the day, whatever we choose to do, art, science, or all of it, or everything in between, we have a responsibility, and someone's watching, and yeah.
Exactly.
And I mean, even just that reminder, like, I love that your daughter said, like, I can't believe there's so many people that loved me and they didn't even know me, and I think like the fact that our ancestors, our grandmas, our moms, where we are today, it's like we are here as a result of love, and so, man, I just feel like you totally like rewrote the narrative of I'm not enough, like you just right there. Okay, y'all, if you don't feel like you're enough after this episode,
and go outside tonight and look at the stars.
Yeah, remember. Look at the stars. Find your lake or river. Just like appreciate. If you don't, I guess that's a thing. Just appreciate everything. It really is a gift. And thank you for holding space.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being a part of it. Thank you for helping us like own the space. It's been beautiful. So before we get going, as a reminder to our listeners, if you want to reach out to Kat, her website is healthyheadwaterslab.ca. You can also find her on Instagram and Facebook at healthyheadwaterslab. And other than that, Kat, is there any other way that you want people to get a hold of you? Like, obviously we can just keep to this, but anything else you want to share, any final thoughts or any other ways you want people to get a hold of you if they want to reach out?
Oh, I'm there. If you follow those socials, that's it. And just, if you never really thought about insects or water, then that channel we're hoping to kind of just make science more accessible through that channel. So send us feedback. And if you don't know what a tapulid or a dragonfly or whatever looks like, or if you don't know why it's, what's the difference between a city river and a forest, an agricultural river, we're just hoping to just change again the narrative. Like, we all benefit and we all need to know and connect with our land. And so that's what we're going to try and do with our socials. We have lots of other stuff happening in the background, with our different campaigns, I guess, thanks to our lab storyteller and the beautiful minds behind that. But I just can't wait to see where this goes. Like, it's an experiment. It's all of it's an experiment. So definitely interact with us in those spaces and let us know what makes sense to you. And if you are rethinking your relationship with water through it, then that I think will be super fun. And I'd be just, again, the nerd at the background being like, oh, how, why? Tell me.
Yeah. And you wouldn't be a scientist if it wasn't an experiment, right? It's like, duh.
Right.
Of course it's going to be an experiment. Awesome. Well, Kat, it's been such an absolute pleasure having you on our show. Thank you for adding another perspective, another story, another narrative to our show, and also just continuing to engage in us. We just very much appreciate you and look forward to continue our friendship, our relationship, and just continue to support one another. Nani, any closing thoughts for
my
you?
Next run, because then I'll be listening to you.
Oh, there you go. Yes.
No, exactly. Thank you again for everything that you shared, for your candor. I think that we are all going to really benefit from, again, your just general curiosity for the world and the work that you do. And I think that you gave us a lot of things to think about today, and you introduced a lot of new ideas to the show. So thank you again for that. And thank you for also marrying the Filipino-American family with the Filipino-Canadian family. That's also really important to us, inclusivity and building that sense of family and community, not only, in the title of our show, the Filipino-American woman, but with other Pinays around the diaspora as well. So thank you for that and everything that you shared. It was such a pleasure talking to you today.
All right,
yes. And again, to our listeners, if you want to get a hold of Nani and I, we do have a phone number, 415-484-8329. Actually, 8329 are the acronyms, TFAW as in the Filipino-American woman, in case y'all are wondering. But once again, 415-484-8329. And of course, we have our website, TFAW as in the Filipino-American woman project.com, TFAWproject.com. We'd love to hear from you. Let's continue the dialogue. Let's continue the conversation. And of course,
Canadians can text you too. Just long distance charges apply.
Yeah. Oh yeah. This is why we use social media, because the charges, it's free, right? Yeah. And so we just appreciate all of you. We love you all. And of course, last but not least, if you want to support our show financially, you could learn more about our private podcast, Chismis with Jen and Nani, at biasboba.com. All right. That's it. Thank you all so much for listening, and we'll chat with you in the next episode. Tune in next time.
Bye.